I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hey, welcome back to the Business of Story. Park Howell here. I am so glad you're here with me today because I have a really important guest and great buddy sitting right across the desk from me. His name is Pete Walsh, and he is a leadership coach and a coach that specifically focuses on coaching family businesses. He has been a very, very powerful coach for me with Park & Co. and my ad agency, and especially my ad agency days, and was also instrumental in helping me make the transition from advertising world into the business of story to where now, as you know, I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the power of story the world over. And I can honestly say without him at my side, I would not have made that transition. In addition to that, Pete and his son, Will Walsh, are great friends with Parker Howell, our son. They went to film school together. They're both over in Hollywood. They're both doing great things. So our lives and our relationships have been steeped in story, and especially as it pertains to leadership coaching and building our respective companies, our respective platforms, by not only understanding the stories that we are believing and that we are living into, but having a great appreciation, understanding, and empathy for those around us, and understanding the stories and the journeys that they are on so that we can collectively grow and become greater entities, greater people, and have just an incredible impact as best we possibly can around the world. So today, I've got with me Pete Walsh from the Family Business Performance Center. Although his overall umbrella company is Peak Performance Coaching. We're going to talk a little bit about the branding of his own organization, but I want you to hear from Pete firsthand because he's been invaluable in my growth, and I know he will be to help you live in to the most powerful story. Pete, welcome to the Business of Story.
Glad to be here. It's exciting. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, and it's really fun to be here and be a part of it today.
Great to have you here. Now, you got to picture how I first met Pete. Our two boys were playing on the high school football team, and this has got to be back in circa 2002 or 2003. They had had a football game across the state over in Parker, Arizona, of all places. And it was an evening game. I couldn't make the trip because our youngest son was also playing Pee Wee football. So we went to his game. Pete and the gang went out. When they came back, it was like 2 a.m. in the morning when the team bus arrived back at Arcadia High School here in Phoenix. And I showed up to pick up our son Parker, and I was standing next to Pete, and Pete stands at what?
6'4".
6'4". So he's there and he's got a big grin. He's the nicest guy in the world. And we just got acquainted right there. And I thought, this is a guy that I could hang with. And we have been best of buds ever since. We've worked with each other in business, as I said earlier, but we have had so much fun in our lives in every other area. So it's just an honor to have you here, Pete.
Well, I'm really glad to be here, and we have had lots of fun together. We've created a lot of stories, and we're creating new stories all the time, right?
Yeah. Now, you come from a fairly prominent business family here in Arizona because it was your granddad that started Walsh Brothers. Can you take us to how that all came around and how you were working for the family company?
Yeah. So my family business, Walsh Brothers Office Equipment, was founded in 1919 in Arizona. We were a typewriter dealership way back in the day. So like a lot of the family businesses I work with, I grew up in and around that family business, company parties, people that had worked for the family for 40, 50 years and their kids. And so it really becomes such a big part of the community. And so I, from an early age, wanted to run our family business. I went to college, got a degree in business, went to work in the family business and worked there for 16 years, climbing the corporate ladder. We had 250 employees. I worked hard, became vice president of the company, and at about 38 years old, realized I wasn't in the right situation. I wasn't where I was supposed to be. And actually, I know we're going to talk a little bit about this, but that's when I got really intrigued with leadership and building strong teams and working for the right kinds of leaders. And my uncle, who I love dearly and respect dearly, he and I just didn't see eye to eye. And as it turned out, I'd lost two brothers and two best friends in a short period of time. So at 38 years old, I was realizing life's short. And do I really want to do this? And my uncle had said, this could be yours someday. But I realized, look, I don't want to be waiting 20 years for an opportunity to run this business. And my wife and I, Karen and the kids, Will and Laura, were at church. And what I like to say is I'm highly spiritual, although not highly religious. I'm a recovering Catholic. But the sermon that day was about finding your special gift. And I prayed in that moment and said, help me find what mine is, because I know I can hit a home run for you. Those were my exact words. 3 days later, a friend of mine who owned a construction company said, our coach said this. And I said, your coach? What's that? And she said, somebody that helps us develop our plans and hold us accountable. And I said, you're kidding. That's a job? Unbelievable. I love growing and developing people. But what I didn't love was the fact that my uncle was a bit of a micromanager. I was much more into innovation and change and expansion, and he was more into being conservative and minding what we had. And by the way, that's one of the backstories for a lot of family businesses. So I was really, my life turned on a dime. I went home and told Karen, I said, you're not going to believe this, but I asked about this. I heard this about leadership coaching. And at the time, nobody even knew what a leadership coach was, quite honestly.
So this was about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I hired a coach, loved what we did, and went to my family and said, I'm going to leave the business and go be a leadership coach.
Did they think you were nuts?
Totally. My uncle just looked at me and said, are you kidding me? Do you have any assurances of making a living? And I said, none. And I eventually turned in my company car. I told the 100 employees that worked with me that I was going to go do something else, and everybody was really shocked. And I went out and started building my leadership coaching business.
So your kids at the time were like 8 and 10 years old.
Yeah,
so you had a family to feed.
Totally.
You had no training in leadership coaching, but you had something in your heart that after that meaningful spiritual moment, 3 days later, you're paying attention, and
Totally.
And the universe says, "Hey, dude, what about this?"
Yeah. So I did go get leadership coaching training. I have a degree in business and marketing and management, but I actually got some coaching training and started coaching nights and weekends to see if I could do it and people could get great results, which they did.
And did you not have an income at this point? I mean, had you left, or were you doing kind of the weaving?
I did both. And I say that to people sometimes. I was building a bridge to my future,
Sure.
But I was coaching nights and weekends, but I could see the people that I were coaching were getting great results. They were loving it. And I said to Karen, I need to go do this full time. Now I went back to the family and said, I'd like to do this part-time. And that was another negotiation that went not very well with my uncle. So it was like
you were going to work part-time at Walsh Brothers and part-time.
And they said, no, it's one or the other. So I had to choose and I left. And but at the beginning, I started in our home. And I coach people all over the country on the phone with a lot of people. And I had to keep telling the kids, be quiet. Karen would tell the kids, be quiet. Dad's working at home now. And they had a meeting one day. And the kids called me out to the kitchen table and said, Dad, you need to get an office. because we're sick of, having to be quiet and not be having fun out at the swimming pool. So shortly thereafter, I got an office.
So Will and Laura kicked you out of your home.
Yeah.
Smart kids.
Yeah.
Smart
So
kids.
I rented a little space and, eventually found my way over here and rented space with you eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. We did that for a number of years. So
Yeah.
here you've got Walsh Brothers, started your grandfather with selling typewriters, but then grew it into like the office furniture product supply business in Arizona.
Yep.
And
Dealership.
Target,
Yep.
dealership, and Target ultimately bought it, about
Yep.
10 years ago or something
Yep.
like that. So you really had a chance to bankroll a family business and not really have to worry a whole lot about working after that. But that just wasn't you. It wasn't your story. You were about helping others, other family businesses.
Yeah, but you also know, so the story gets a little bit more complicated. But, at 38 years old, I realized I wanted to do something I really loved. And I love leadership. I'm passionate about leadership and helping teams of leaders in business. I'm really passionate about business. So this opening presented itself and I had to take it. And so I meet a lot of people in family businesses and in non-family businesses that are really not happy with what they're doing. They somehow or another got into it. They've been doing it for 20 years. They're paid well, but it just really doesn't light them up. So when I found coaching and leadership coaching, it was an opportunity for me to do something I was really passionate about. So I started coaching in corporate America, actually, because corporations at the time were the ones that were really hiring leadership coaches. And I did that for many years. And then some people, advisors to wealthy family businesses, came to me and said, you should coach in family businesses, given your background. And I said, no, I don't want any part of that because it's really messy. It's complicated. And they said, well, you really ought to check it out. So they introduced me to some of their families and I loved it. I'd been away long enough. I'd been coaching in non-family businesses and in some really well-run corporations that I was able to bring those leadership development skills back into the family business. And it was just a home run. And so, I said to you earlier, one of my dreams was to run my family business. But as it turned out, maybe the guy upstairs had a different plan for me, and I now get to impact family businesses all over the world. So William and I have filmed over 50 videos. We have a website that has free tools that family businesses come to. And quite honestly, I'm at a point in my life where I love having such a great impact on people. So it's not even really about the money. I mean, I have a stated goal of impacting 500 families a year with tools, free tools, advice. I'm fortunate enough to get to coach some of those families in an ongoing relationship. But, Park, there's so much pain in family businesses. Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of people that are some way or another got into it, but then they're stuck. They really feel stuck in it. So I feel just incredibly blessed to get to do what I do.
Well, and I would imagine it's much easier to coach a family business outside of your own family business because you have that benefit of having some distance and those emotional ties with that family, but you also have an appreciation for what they're going through when they are
totally
fighting each other.
Totally. Mm-hmm. But because I got to coach at your agency, and Park and I have a funny little saying between us, which is that I say, I got a punch in the nose. And oh, by the way, Park said that to me a couple of days ago. He said, I got a punch in the nose, pal.
But I got that from Pete because he did punch me in the nose figuratively one day, and I cracked up. I said, oh, you're so right. And I love that line. So I've used it many times.
So a great coach holds the mirror up. Yeah, it's really hard for you to see your own stuff. So a great coach will hold the mirror up and give you really straight, objective, strong feedback that will help move you to a new level. And so whether it's in a family business or a non-family business, a great coach really will push you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, when you really started working with me, I remember coming into your office and I was pretty upset I can't remember exactly what I was upset about because you were able to disarm that in me. But I remember sitting down and I said, and this and that, and gosh darn it, this is going on. I can't believe this is happening. And I was really frustrated. And you just looked and you had this sort of Cheshire cat grin on your face, and you said, listen to yourself. That's just a story you're telling yourself. You are just making that up in your mind right now. Is that really going on? And so you used my own story on me, but it was a very significant moment for me because I really understood it is all about the stories that we create in our head, right or wrong, fact or fiction. Now, you had said earlier, you've got a fictional story for yourself that says, I'm going to help 500 families, 500 people this year. But it's a story that you can create become a factual endeavor when you look back over 2018 and into 2019 and how many people you impact. But those stories that we tell ourselves are so unbelievably powerful, both the fiction and the nonfiction. How do you deal with that with the families that you own? Because families in particular are ripe with these crazy stories and contradictory stories and anti-stories going on.
Yeah. And the whole family lives into a story. And like my family, those stories could be 100 years old. So our family business was 90 years old. And so that story was really deep. It was really had been around for a long time. But you and I both did something many years ago. We attended a training that taught us about language and how we're linguistic beings. And so leadership is so much about language. And so what I do with families, what I do with teams of leaders and teams and companies is help them become more aware of listening to the stories them telling themselves. You and I, there's a concept I use in my work called detached observer. And that's where you get like 5 feet above yourself and can kind of look without judgment and interpretation, like, wow, what is that? What are they saying?
Detached observer?
Detached observer. So kind of remove yourself from the story. So yeah, with the family teams, it's really with family businesses, it's to kind of suspend the story, stop it for a moment, play it back to them, say, this is what I'm hearing. And that really then starts to give them access to create a new story.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I got to use my punch. You got a punch in the nose line, your line, which is the best line in the world. We were working on your brand story a few years back. And I knew you as peak performance coaching. And I kept asking you, why aren't you diving deeper into this family business coaching? Because you do it with families all around the country. And I'll speak for you and then you correct me, but I think your mindset is like all of our mindsets. You're afraid if you focus just on family business that you might miss out on really good leadership coaching opportunities in non-family businesses.
True. The other thing, yeah. So you're right. And so then I actually created the Family Business Performance Center.
Right.
And I actually remember something else that you may not remember at the time. A family from North Carolina called me. They had one phone call with me and hired me to come out and work with them. And you said, dude, if somebody from North Carolina with one phone calls having you work for them, that is your differentiator. That's what you need to be doing. So I then created the Family Business Performance Center, which is a separate brand. We created a different website, and Park & Co. helped us develop a great tagline, a great advertising campaign that we did at the time that said, destroy the competition, not your family. And I still love that to this day because it's so true. Because
it's such a loaded story just in that line alone.
And just got exposed today to another family that was getting ready to hire me, and then they threw down, lawyered up, fired the son, got into legal action. The company's in a tailspin. I mean, it's very, very sad because so many of these family businesses like ours, thriving, great family businesses, but the interpersonal communications, the leadership, the conflict can really destroy the business and the family.
And we were talking about how many leadership coaches are there in Arizona, North America, and the world. You know, I've just looked at a stat yesterday about just attorneys. There's 1.34 million attorneys in the U.S. alone, practicing attorneys. And so you are like me, are like my listeners, is that if you don't have a defined differentiator in the market, we're all just numbers. And what does numbers start with? N-U-M-B. People are numb to what our offering is. So you have dialed in and you have the pedigree for that family business coaching, given what you've done. But I still, to this day, see you sometimes still resist that for fear of losing out on this other business of just overall leadership coaching because you're exceptional at that. But my argument is those folks are still going to come. They're going to listen to you. They're going to see what you're doing with your family businesses. And you say, you know what? I might not be running a family business, but he makes a lot of sense. And the fact of the matter is your coaching goes across all leadership levels.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One is I do believe that all small groups of people become like family. So even when I think back to your agency, it wasn't a family business per se, but it felt a lot like a family, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a brother and a sister and a dad, and there's different personalities, and there's little cliques within the group and all of that. So I totally hear you. I agree. The family business is a super unique niche, but at the same time, I love human beings and I love leadership. So even in some of those other companies, it really morphs into it, feels like a family, but I totally hear you.
Now you are working with families around the world now. They're coming in through your website. They're using your online tools and they're calling you up for coaching and so forth. What do you see is the universal theme in all of them, whether they're in Brazil or Tokyo or Germany or whoever you're coaching out there? What do we all have in common as family-run businesses?
We have different styles and we have conflict, and we don't know how to deal with conflict that well. I mean, I still go back, leadership, communication. So we have different ways that we want to do things. And in a family then, like your family, we start tying it back to Park's been doing this to me since I was in 6th grade and he was in 8th grade and he's a jerk and he's mistreating me. And it may be some of that, but it may just be that you have different opinions about how to run the business. So conflict, I think, is number one. If everybody was the same, and that's the thing that's so ironic about it, if everybody was the same, it wouldn't be a very good company. We don't want all CFOs. We want a marketing person, a CFO, customer service. So they have different styles.
And you want a risk taker, and you want a conservative, and you want someone in the middle to balance each other.
And that ties back to my story and my uncle's story. He was super conservative, methodical, financially oriented, and I was more of an innovative, big picture. And if the two of us had come together, it would have been a beautiful partnership. But instead, he spent a lot of time thinking like, you got way too many dumb ideas and none of them are worthwhile. And I kept thinking, you're way too conservative and this is boring. So when people can come together, when they can learn to have productive conflict, when they can learn to build off of each other's unique strengths and styles and appreciate those styles, then they can create a really strong team and learn to work together. But I do want to talk for a minute about my unique differentiator. It's something we haven't talked about, you've forgotten about perhaps a little bit.
Never.
This idea of deliberate practice.
Oh, yeah.
So the best athletic teams, the most elite athletes in the world get together and they practice the fundamental skills. So my first book that I wrote was called Coach to Win the Leadership Game. And that was all about this coaching model. And my very first coach, Bill Shover, who I loved, and I have a relationship to this day.
And he's an icon in Arizona.
He is. But he taught us how to practice the fundamentals. And we got out on the field and we pretended it was the middle of the game. And we said, what are we going to do? And how do you handle that? So then when we were in the game, we knew what to do. So with family businesses or non-family businesses, I teach them how to practice giving and receiving feedback, listening to each other, setting good goals, being leaders, resolving conflict. Vladimir Horowitz was the best piano player on the planet, and you should know this. And by the way, Park's a great piano player if you don't know, and he actually wrote a song about me. We'll get to that later. No, not right now.
Right, okay.
He did. But Vladimir Horowitz said, if I stop practicing for a day, I notice. And in 2 days, the critics notice. And in 3 days, it starts to really slip away. So the guy was the best piano player, but he's got to practice. So I really work with these leaders and teams around a core set of skills that have to be practiced. So if I go to a conflict seminar and I get good, but I don't keep practicing, it'll go away. And that's really the big difference between coaching and training. Training is like a one-time exchange of some ideas. Coaching is ongoing improvement.
Yeah, I've learned and seen the same things, and you and I have had this conversation where I'm brought in. It can be a keynote speech and an hour to 90-minute presentation of which I get the gang involved, and they apply their storytelling knowledge in it, and so they have something that they can work with. But I've learned as well, if they don't deliberately practice it day in and day out, they're going to lose it. They're going to default back to what they know or what they don't know because this stuff is not taught in school. Leadership training is not really taught in school very much, and certainly storytelling isn't. And now one of my most popular workshops is an 8-week deliberate practice program where I work with clients, bring in their team for a half a day, give them 3 really functional tools to use, and then every week they have an assignment and they apply those. And at the end of the 8-week process, then we continue that coaching. But at least a bit of a habit has taken, and I've learned a lot of that from you because that's how you approach a lot of your leadership coaching.
Yeah, and it's what we call reviewing the game film. So, and you and I would do that way back in the day when I was coaching you. You'd say, "I got this issue. I don't know what to do." We'd talk it through. We'd practice, and then at next week's session, I'd say, how did that conversation go with Mary or with Joe or with that customer? So coaching's about, having these ideas, this idea of reflective practitioner. I think about what I'm going to do, then I go perform, then I stop and reflect again and think, how did I do and how could I have done better? And then that process starts over again. And so again, the great performers, musicians, athletes, they will watch their performance after the fact and say, wow, why'd we do that? Or hold on, how did that happen? So that's really where a coaching process will create long-term sustainable change. But the other thing I want to talk about in relation to your work is creating a sustainable brand, a sustainable company. We work a lot in leadership succession. So they have maybe a great leader or a leader who has the story, but then conveying it to others and handing it off to other people. So in companies that are both family companies or non-family companies, there is a time and a day for a leader, and then there's a time for a change in leadership. And that's a real risky moment for a business when you're looking to identify a new leader. And so that's what we call succession planning in our work.
Can you give us an example of a family, and change the name to protect the innocent, where you felt like they had a good story, it was going, but it was not successfully being handed down to the next generation coming in, and there was a disconnect there where you were able to help them to align that narrative?
Yeah. Well, so I'm thinking of one family in particular, and actually this comes up a lot. So a family with a father who was just a brilliant, visionary, wonderful guy, and set up a business that would let that family be financially successful for the next 6 generations. I mean, we're doing planning for 6 generations.
What industry
ahead.
was it in?
Commercial real estate development.
Okay.
And so when I got there, there were 3 sons, and they were trying to figure out who would be the future leader of the business. Now, you can imagine as a father what an incredibly difficult situation that is, to try to anoint one son and then not alienate the other sons, their wives, the kids, disrupt the whole family.
Because you love them all equally, but when it comes to business, some have the temperament and the skills and the talent where others may not.
Exactly. And so these are the kinds of free tools we have available at the website to go in. Your business. I know leadership. And so within leadership are a lot of observable, measurable components. So what we did with that family is created a process to say, if you will, let me put everybody on the scale. Let me do the x-ray for everybody in terms of what their leadership skills and talents are.
And you're able to do it as the detached observer from the outside guy looking in.
Exactly. And then help them identify, and in that particular family, help identify that, this one person is the most suited to be the president. This person is best suited to be the CFO, and this one's best suited to be the salesperson. But do that in a way that the family feels that it was fair, it was objective, took a lot of pressure off of dad, and so it was really a good success. But I'd like to just tell one other story, if I could, of a family of a father, and this happens quite a bit, where dad, brilliant, again, visionary, created an unbelievable business. And one of the deliberate practices is an annual meeting. And I said, at the annual meeting, you're going to get up and speak about the traits that you feel are most important in leadership and in this business. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not comfortable doing that. And I said, you're going to do it. You're going to do it Saturday at 2:00. And so I got dad up there in front of his children and his grandchildren that are now in their teens and early 20s. And I just led a conversation about the attributes of a successful business, a successful family, really got the guy speaking, doing a great job. And we documented all those notes. And 6 months later, he passed away abruptly in the middle of the night.
Whoa.
And I thought, how cool is that I helped facilitate, I helped bring out of his brain the leadership lessons for this family, because
it's the passing of the baton
totally
in story.
Yeah. Well, now you would know because I studied anthropology in college, but back in the day, families sat around the campfire and told stories. The elders told stories, and that's how some of the DNA of the family and all the tribe was carried on. But they don't do that well. And that guy in particular was a great guy, but he wasn't that great of a teacher. And so part of what I'll do is helped him, kind of distill and pull out his leadership story.
Yeah. And he was probably, raised a family of, don't worry, I've got this, kids. And they don't think about or are taught how to share that story and share that wisdom.
Yeah.
And so they become sort of the reluctant hero in that. And you're the mentor dragging them out. Their call to adventure is, you've got to share this with the family, which also means they got to be vulnerable. So they're like, I don't know about this, Pete. This is a whole other side of me they've never seen. So kudos to get them out and to pull that out of them.
Yeah. Well, it's really great. And unfortunately, though, back to your story cycle, I get calls a lot from families that have already had a disruptive moment. They've already had something really bad happen. Mm-hmm. And, I say to them a lot, and I joke with families and the folks, my readers, I tell them, call me 5 years ahead of when you think you should call me, because it really becomes bad. If you and I are brothers-in-law and then I unload on you or I say some really bad stuff in the heat of conflict, it's hard to kind of put some of that stuff back together. So, it's ideally we want to help people start to think and create new narratives, new practices when that disruptive thing is just getting started and not blowing up.
Yeah, but I don't know how much of that is a pipe dream. Those, I think, that are really aware of what's going on in their company and hear that point right there will think, oh, Pete's got a point and pick it up. But us Homo sapiens, we're set on status quo mode. Yeah. We don't want to tackle that until the universe punches us in the nose and turns our world upside down. That is the hero's journey. And now it's like, oh crap, I actually have to deal with this. Who am I going to turn to?
Totally.
And then they go to the mentor and say, oh, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Help me out of this.
I start trying to sew limbs back onto people, and I say, you should have called me before the bomb blew up. One of my favorite tools is an infographic that we created a few years ago called the Landmine Detection Map, and that's available at the website. And it's a little visual that shows you that on the surface, it looks like this, but underneath, these things are there. Yeah. They're kind of building energy, and they're going to blow, and it's going to be a bad situation.
I remember when you showed me your landmine detection map, I'm going, dude, this is the story cycle. This is the human journey. You have just simply taken Joseph Campbell's monomyth and now applied it to leadership, family coaching, because it's the same things we all go through, but we're reluctant to ask for help until we absolutely need it. We're not very good at preventive situations. It's always like, no, I'm good until I fall over dead, and then I'm not so good.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really great is the families and some of the non-family clients I work with, they're so passionate about their business and the story of it and the impact it's having on their family, the families like at Walsh Brothers. There were, hundreds of families that were relying on that business, that business had provided their livelihood and their family security. So I think that goes back to the importance of leadership. There's a lot on the line. And so when leaders can learn how to be the kinds of leaders that build loyal followings, have healthy communication, good ways to deal with conflict, it really not only serves their customers, it serves their families. It's really, that's why I love leadership so much.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the TEDx talk I did earlier this year and it was for the 20-somethings in the audience there. And it was about not looking for your story, but start finding your scenes, those moments that have shaped who you are today. Knit those scenes together. There, your story is actually going to find you. So it took you 38 years, growing up in the Walsh Brothers family. Your dad worked for him. Your uncle worked for him. Do your brothers work for him? I mean,
sure.
Your mom was in
the
it.
family.
Everybody was in it.
Well, no, my mom didn't. Nobody wanted mom down at the business. No, I'm kidding. Oh my gosh, no.
We won't let her hear this. But 38 years in, you've got a family, wife and kids. I imagine not a whole lot in the bank because none of us do at 38, especially when you're raising kids. And you decided to make a major shift in your life. Can you take us to a moment in hindsight now, when you were a kid, and maybe it was when Bill Shover was coaching or whatever, that connected with that moment 3 days after church when somebody said, oh, our coach just left, and you said, coaching, that's a thing? In hindsight, did you see that maybe the universe had planted that coaching seed in your life back as a kid, but you were living the Walsh Brothers story until you finally, until you woke up at 38 and said, that's not my story. This is my new story. I don't know where it's going to lead me, but this is what I'm going after. Can you take us to that moment?
Well, the thought that comes to my mind, a couple things. One is since I was a little kid, I was so intrigued by two things. Continuous improvement. I would sit out in my front yard and shoot hoops for hours and days and just trying to get better. So I think this thing of like performance improvement. And as an entrepreneur, I love business. And so I love helping business leaders. My sister would remind me that I set up a store in my bedroom when I was like 10 years old and she was 8 years old.
What
and
could you possibly have been selling?
It was like a grocery store. And she came in and I would make her come in and buy stuff and I would sell it to her. So I think I loved being an entrepreneur and I loved performance improvement and kind of the sports analogy and how that works. But the other thing that I think about in my youth is one day when I was 9 years old, I lost my brother. Like one day he passed away. He was 5, very abruptly. And those early lessons, I got kicked in the teeth a few times like that, where by the time I was 38, maybe I realized like, hey man, and I told you I'd lost a couple best friends at that point. I thought like, this is not a dress rehearsal. You better start doing what you want to do, how you want to do it, with the people you want to do it with, which is one of the things I've been saying for the last 20 years. I get to work with the people I love working with and want to work with. And so life is short, man. Mm-hmm. And so you shouldn't be miserable. You shouldn't be unhappy with the company you're working with. You shouldn't be unhappy in your family business. So I had a lot of hard lessons along the way that made it very clear to me that life is short and you should enjoy every moment.
Yeah. Well, you've shared a lot of those with me. And I know the last 4 or 5 years when I was running parking companies, so we're talking roughly 2012 to 16, you and I being such good friends, you knew that I wasn't happy, and I was searching because I realized I loved my advertising career up to, that point, but I was ready for something different. And at one point you said, you're telling yourself the wrong stories. You're living into the wrong stories. You even recommended that I go to Landmark, which I did, which was just absolutely game changing for me, because that's all about the stories and the stories we tell ourselves. And I saw some really amazing transformation happen in my sessions in August of 2015. I will never forget them. And I remember coming into your office in early September and said, it's time. I've got to take responsibility for my story and my happiness. And if I'm not happy, it's my own damn fault. And you said, yep, absolutely, dude. Yep, go for it. And then you said it's going to take you a while to unwrap this, unwrap the agency. The building we owned here, we were in 75% of it. We had to find tenants to go in there. And I got to tell you, my first year of 2016 in Business of Story was really tough. I learned, and you helped me through that tremendously, not only as a friend, but a leadership coach. And folks, one of the stories that I had such a hard time shaking, and in talking with Pete about this, is I was so used to earning a living and securing my family as an ad agency owner that my identity was so wrapped up in Park & Co. that it took me a full 12 months to shake that, to say that, no, I'm not living into that story anymore. That's not who I am. I am about helping people find their most powerful stories and living into them. So, made that transition in 16. We leased out the building and parts of it. So we got that taken care of. 17, it started taking off. In 2018, I've had my best year. 2019 is all about scaling this because it's so fantastic. So I got to thank you, Pete, because you have been there helping me as a coach along the way. But I would imagine you see that with families too. How often do you have to encourage a family member to vote themselves off the island? To say, Timmy, it's still mom and dad's company, and maybe you're not cut out for this. Maybe you're living into your version of the Walsh brothers story, and you should really be doing this. Does that come up very often?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the most popular articles that people find at my website is an article I wrote that said something like 15 years ago, why I decided to leave my family business. So actually, one of the most popular search strings that people find me on is how or why to leave the family business. But I want to go a couple other places. Two things. One is it was really fun watching all that go on, by the way. So as a coach, you're like standing there and you're kind of like objectively, take a deep breath. It'll all work out. So you really handled it quite well. So it's good to have someone to kind of walk alongside of you. It took a lot of courage, dude. I really want to commend you for your courage. And that's the thing. It takes a lot of courage to want something more for yourself and to be willing to go get it. So, and the other thing is with the family businesses, and we do what's called employment policy. We tell them for the up and coming people in the family business, make them go work someplace else for 2 to 5 years to get experience. And I think also
don't let them into the sandbox right away. Make them go somewhere.
Totally. So because one of the regrets for some of the people is I meet that are 40, 45 years old. They've been doing it their whole life. Like me, maybe they grew up in the family business and they think, what if, or what should I always kind of had an interest in this. And so go do something else. I think change is good for people. So you had the courage to do that. But yeah, for some families, I've helped them exit people out of their business. And that's back to objectivity. That's back to measurement, where we can say, hey, here's what you think you're doing. Here's what you say you're doing, but here's what you're really doing. And that result is not working. Another part of coaching is getting objective feedback. So one of the things that we do is 360-degree feedback, where we ask others, like I'll tell you what I'm like, but then if you ask 6 clients or you ask people, you'll get a different perspective. So yeah, sometimes we have to have the courage to help the family exit people out of the business.
Have you ever had the situation where a family might be having a rigorous company, a company that's doing really well, but it is so destroying a family that you actually ask them to sell it or coach them into, what's more important, the success of this business or the success of this family?
Definitely. And a family business, every business has a life cycle. So the end, there's a beginning, a middle, and end. And in our family,
Story.
yeah, in our family, actually, we sold our family business in 2007 to Target Corporation. It was the right thing for the family and for the business. As it turned out, when I was there were 3 family members and a couple of hundred employees, and we didn't have that next generation. So I think as family business owners or as business owners, you have to realize that your business has a life cycle. So there is a time. So like I said earlier, you have to find that next successor who you can hand it off to, or you have to realize that this is a time for this business to end. But I have to tell you, because you just spoke about it, many times what should be a source of such pride, financial security, and wealth for the family becomes a source of heartache, dysfunction, lawyers, conflict, people not seeing each other, never speaking to each other again. It's really, really sad. And so that goes back to your work about creating a story in which everybody can live into, in which everybody can win, everybody can get what they need out of this business. But as you know, there are big personalities, there are dominating personalities, there are people that are closed-minded, and it's like, this is the way this should be. So it happens a lot, and it's just very, very sad, because the business is a wonderful platform for success for the family, but it becomes just such a huge source of conflict and battle that it can really destroy the family.
And I would imagine when you have those rival personalities, people tend to say right and wrong. Well, I'm right and they're wrong. I'm right and they're wrong. If you have a family-run business and you've got someone who's aggressive and someone else who's conservative, neither of them are right or wrong in their position. Is that right? It's just the way they are. It's just, the whole idea is to make it work. Does it work or does it not work? But to try to avoid pointing fingers and saying, well, I'm right and you're wrong, or your way of doing things is just wrong. It just either works or it doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely. And there is control. So in our situation, back to our situation, again, love my uncle, loved him dearly. He was a smart man and did so many things right, but there were some things that he did different than I wanted to do them, but he owned the majority of the business. So I had to realize, like it or not, or whatever, I think that's not going to change. And so power, control is a thing that comes up for some families. So our family business, we pruned the family tree. In 1929, my grandfather bought out his brother. And in 1969, they bought out my father. And so in some partnerships in families and even non-family businesses, at times there's a time where there should be a parting of the ways. But part of what I'm working on to help them is, just as you said, like with my uncle and I, it was a very peaceful parting of the ways, loved each other, continued to have dinner together for the next 20 years. And that's the thing that I think is problematic, is when people make one person right, the other person wrong, storm out, and then they never see each other again. It's like, no, we just have some different ways of looking at the world. And, one of the other things that I start studying, and you've studied a bit with me, is Buddhism and loving compassion. And so, again, the business is a vehicle to serve customers, create value, create wealth, but it shouldn't become like the biggest, most important thing, and it shouldn't become something that destroys us.
Yeah. The power of story and visualization. Will you share with our listeners your cabin?
I will.
Because to me, it's just the time that you did this, what was happening in your life, and how you so enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, there's another little backstory. So grandfather had a vision that he wanted his employees of his company in the 1940s to be able to enjoy a nice vacation. So he bought land up on the river in northern Arizona, and he said, I'll supply the material and the land if you guys build the building.
Was that the Verde River?
Yeah. So they built the cabins, and we spent our childhood. The employees checked out the cabins. It was such a beautiful thing.
So you grew up there as his grandson, and just loved
and
the
as an
cabin
employee, my father was an employee, and so we used the cabins. So when I left the family business, my uncle said, you realize you won't be able to use the cabins. And like, I'd been going there with my wife and kids, and they, it was just like, really? But again, I respect him. We were a business first family. That was a business rule. He wasn't going to change. The cabins were for employees and their families. And if I was leaving the business, I couldn't use the cabins. So we started thinking about that. And I wrote on an index card, we will get a cabin in the woods by 2002.
And this is when you had just started your coaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't even know if this coaching thing's going to work.
Right. But I'm dreaming. I'm creating visualization. I'm creating intention. I wrote
creating an imagined reality, as they call
I put it up on the wall.
Yeah.
And I was at Rotary. I was in the Rotary Club, Phoenix East Rotary Club, and I was sitting at the table and I was telling people I'm going to get a cabin in the woods someday, because that's leadership. I'm leading myself. I'm leading my family. I'm creating these possibilities. And a guy across the way, Bill Hoffman was his name, Dr. Bill Hoffman. He said, I've got a cabin in the woods that I'm selling. And we caught each other's eye and I said, okay. And I went and checked it out, and it was awesome. It was beautiful. And Karen and I looked at each other and we said, should we get this? Well, I just started my business. I couldn't buy a washer or dryer on time, much less a cabin. And Dr. Hoffman said, if you want it, you can just make payments to my wife and I. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And I thought, I'm just still not sure I can pull this off. So we were contemplating it, and my horoscope came out. Your horoscope, I read my horoscope on the day that I'm born each year, and it said, you're going to be a pioneer in your industry, which I thought was awesome because I joined my new industry of coaching, professional coaching. And if you're married, you're going to get a second home. And I showed that to my daughter, Laura, and she said, we're getting the cabin. Because we were contemplating it as a family. Well, they'd thrown
you out of the house already, so you had to listen to 8-year-old Laura say, we're getting the cabin.
So we, and I still have that little framed horoscope. And, shortly thereafter, the 9/11 hit. It was very difficult. And people looked at me and said, and I looked at me in the mirror and said, I've got 2 homes. I gave up my cushy job down there at the family business, right? As a vice president, there's 250 employees. I have to fire, you'd think, 240 before they got rid of me, kind of, sort of. But people said to me, oh my gosh, and leadership coaching, and oh boy. But I didn't buy into that story. I was like, no, I got a family to feed, and my business grew every year. And, what you believe is so much a part of what will happen. So I didn't buy into the fact that there was a, difficult time right there. And I just kept forging ahead, and we had a lot of success. And as you know, we've enjoyed 20 years at our beautiful cabin in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's such a beautiful place that Michelle and I ended up getting a little lot up there, and we're building a place now up in Munns Park as well.
Yeah.
I can't wait. We're going to have so much fun this summer.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be awesome.
Pete, what would you tell, final thing here, for our listeners listening to this, leadership on all realms? They don't have to be, running a family business. It could be just a solopreneur out there. Maybe it's an individual in a very large company, and they are trying to build a bit of a family around, their group and their teamwork. What are a couple, 3 things that we could all do right now just to get a little bit more on our leadership game?
Well, I would say getting feedback. Right. So regularly soliciting feedback. And I think we just don't do that. And back to your thing earlier about Homo sapiens and status quo. So create a feedback loop. So great leaders are constantly asking, how am I doing? How are we doing? So that's the first thing.
And they're asking that of their own bosses and also of their underlings, of their colleagues.
Totally. Yeah. Now, again, and that's why many times people get coaching in the mix, but you want to have a little objectivity to it, but you want to get feedback. Then secondly, you want to commit to this idea of being a reflective practitioner, which is, let's think about what we're going to do. Let's strategize and go perform, and then let's stop and give ourselves the time to reflect and critique that performance and do that over again. I said to my 28-year-old now daughter, Laura, And if you can fall in love with that process right there, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you and I are both, living examples of that. At this point in our career, we continue to learn, to grow. You just gave me a book a few weeks ago so I guess the third piece is keep putting in new knowledge and trying to integrate that into what you're doing.
Follow your curiosities.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Our son, Cade, is going to CRAS, the Conservatory of Recording Sciences and Arts. Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences. And he starts on Friday. And he said to me, this has also had me kind of think about, I think I might want to go into archaeology. He's loved archaeology ever since he was a little kid. And I thought those are two interesting worlds, the music production world and archaeology. And you know what he said to me? He goes, I could see myself one day in Egypt on a dig by day and then being a DJ by night. And I said, Cade, in my time growing up, that would never fly, but you could absolutely do that in this day and age. So you have to be able to have this vision of what is uniquely your own story. Surround yourself with people that support you, and even those that question you on it, because it helps push you forward and kind of keep you balanced in that pursuit. But I think you're exactly right. Ask for feedback, be reflective, be aware of what you're doing, and then fill your mind with what really you're curious about, with as much knowledge and people that can help you.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'd like to say, this perhaps, my first ritual, and I've thought also in your story cycle after going through and then developing ritual.
Chapter 10.
Yeah. My first ritual of the day is to look at my vision board. And I have a vision board for each area of my life, professionally, personally, and I put pictures on there. And so, you have to dream. You have to visualize a new future. And I do that every day. I mean, I look at my visualization board. And so, that's another great example of a deliberate practice. So you've got to be able to dream, and you got to keep revisiting and practicing and moving toward that every day.
Without a doubt. Pete, where can people learn more about you and actually start using some of your tools that they could put to work on their own leadership? I've
got two sites. FamilyBusinessPerformance.com is the Family Business Performance Center, and they can get free tools. There's a scorecard, a landmine detection kit, which is really great.
And a bunch of videos there.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. And then Peak Coach, Peak like mountaintop, peakcoach.com.
Peak.
Yeah, is my leadership coaching site. And again, some good tools there and information and access to the books I've written. And I just really appreciate the chance to be here on the show with you. Fun to create. We create in a lot of different ways. And so I've been looking forward to this. And I know the work you're doing. I've lived it firsthand. You're actually, the story cycle process helped me distill who I am, what kind of leader I am, what kind of mentor. And so your tools are fabulous. And I think the work that I'm doing is a great testimonial to that as well.
Oh, well, thanks, Pete. And thank you so much for being here on Business's Story.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you all for listening to this edition. Of course, if I can be of service to you, you know where to go, businessofstory.com. But maybe more importantly, if you liked what you heard on this show today, Pete just speaks such great common sense, has such great experience in the leadership realm, and you've got a friend, a family member, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's an underling, maybe it's someone you know who's trying to build a business and they could use some help. Share the show with them. Share Pete's wisdom with them. You're going to help them live into a more powerful story, and that's really what it's all about here. So thank you for listening, and remember to come back next week when we'll have another amazing story artist on the business of story like Pete Walsh. And until then, always remember, the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.